Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hold. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the book.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, Sherry Horn-Hassan of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on April 8th, 2021 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. So first, I just want to remind everyone that you can sign up for my Conversations About Consciousness newsletter by going to Karmic Evolution on Facebook, scrolling down the left-hand side and clicking Join Email List. Second, if you've missed any past shows or want to re-listen to one, you can find it on my website at karmicevolution.com. Just go to the upper right-hand corner of the banner where it says Radio Show, and if you click on that, you'll find the link to listen to the live shows as well as the archived recordings, the listings of all the past show recordings. Now, also, I just want to remind everyone, if you'd like to book a special discounted 1-hour Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $99, and this is a reading in which we identify the energetic patterns into which your soul chose to be born into this lifetime, past life karma, and what kind of karmic conditioning may be holding you back now, and your soul's true destiny and purpose in this lifetime, please shoot me an email at Sherry, that's SHERI, at Karmic Evolution, and I'll be happy to schedule this with you. Finally, I just want to let everyone know that I've been having some technical difficulties lately, such as losing the audio on my current computer and a few other issues, and I felt it necessary to take a few weeks off and just regroup. So I've been playing a few reruns, which I hope you all enjoy while I get my technical stuff together and working properly again. So I'll keep you posted on next week's show on my Facebook page and in my newsletter. But meanwhile, today I'm giving you the up-to-date Astro news you can use, along with a replay of my interview with renowned Jungian astrologer ERIN Sullivan, most of which I believe to be relevant still. So please ignore the ad for next week's show at the end, as clearly it's from a while back. And please know that you can likely still contact ERIN to purchase her offering made at the end of the show, as I'm sure she'll be thrilled to accommodate you. Okay, so let's get to this week's Astro news you can use. The monthly lunar cycle's waning now until the Aries New Moon occurs on April 11th. Until then, we're still releasing the energies of the March 29th Libra full moon, which include letting go of any attachment to valuing independence over negotiation and compromise, and any attitudes of subjective self-interest at the expense of the rights of others. Now, I didn't get to put out a newsletter for this lunation, but because it was Sun, Chiron, Venus, and Aries, we are opposite the Libra full moon. We were asked to figure out where our ability to initiate, right, to be motivated, is wounded, and that can come in a variety of different ways. And I'll probably talk about that next week or the week after, because I am hoping to do the Mars Aries webinar Facebook Live that I promised a few weeks back before everything just broke. Anyway, so now Mercury tomorrow on April 9th conjoins wounded healer Chiron in Aries, and that provides us opportunities to voice our pain and to share our woundedness with others in ways that promotes further healing. Mars in Gemini squares Neptune in Pisces April 9th too. So watch for succumbing to negative or demoralizing thoughts, including self-doubt or feelings of inadequacy, and try to rest rather than overdoing it physically right now. We can make this energy work best for us when we limit engagement with the outside world, and thus we avoid the temptation to deceive others or for them to deceive us. I mean, many times we deceive ourselves without knowing it, right? And we can choose to tap into our own intuitive process instead. So forging ahead with our goals when we're tired or depressed or debilitated makes much less sense than receiving inspiration that we can act on later when we'll be better equipped to move ahead forcefully and purposely. And it pays for us to remember that from chaos, which is always confusing, comes clarity in the long run. Plus, this energy is short-lived, so write it out, since April 10th brings a sextile from Mercury in Aries to Saturn in Aquarius, and from Venus in Aries to Jupiter in Aquarius. So together, these aspects present they present opportunities to tend to life's details for the purpose of improving our situations, particularly vis-a-vis finances and law. So again, sleep and dream through Mars square Neptune on the 9th, tomorrow, and be rewarded by the opportunities such rest can afford us to get back into the game and take advantage of life positively by April 10th. Now, April 11th brings us the Aries New Moon at 22 degrees and 24 minutes of the sign of Aries at 7:31 p.m. Pacific time and 10:31 p.m. Eastern time. And this calls us to plant seeds that blossom into clarity around what we desire to initiate now. We've got Chiron, Mercury, Ceres, the Sun, Moon, Eris, and Venus all in Aries right now, with both luminaries sextiling Mars in Gemini and waxing towards squares with Pluto in Capricorn. Since Venus perfects her square with Pluto shortly after this lunation, which happens, and the moon squares Pluto exact the following day on the 12th, and the sun squares Pluto April 16th, we know this Aries full moon sets us up for an internal challenge in terms of evolutionary soul growth. Now, Venus square Pluto revolves around developing the inner emotional resources necessary to let go of old patterns of behavior that lead us to control, coerce, or manipulate others in our relationships, or vice versa. This aspect provides the chance to understand any such behaviors, whether they're our own or that of others, and that they're likely born from an internal sense of insecurity or disempowerment. So during this period through April 16th, power struggles, particularly with women, family, or those who hold some kind of authority over us, may arise. And if so, it's an indication that it's time to call upon our inner source of strength as a tool for self-empowerment by consciously choosing to no longer be afraid of the power that others hold over us, or that we think they hold over us. Now, the waxing sextiles of the Aries moon and sun to Mars, the latter of which perfects April 13th, portend opportunities for parties to communicate clearly so as to be heard and understood now. So any confrontations between now and then may well end up clearing the air in a more fortuitous manner. And that can aid us all, both within the collective and personally, to engage in our new ventures, plans, goals, initiatives, births, and rebirths. I mean, Aries time is springtime after all, as part of the challenges of consciously pursuing overall evolutionary soul growth, particularly around the theme of empowerment. And in this light, we might look at this particular Aries new moon energy as a fresh start, the ability to look at the world through new eyes, even I would say the eyes of a newborn, to see things differently as we all begin to venture out again soon. Now, this lunation also asks us to contemplate what's changed, what's been lost, loved ones, jobs, living situations, other relationships or friendships that have broken down, and what's been gained. In some cases, new love, new friends, or old friends, have come through for us, new jobs, or new discoveries about our passions in life or vocations, new places to live, all through the knowledge that the evolutionary process of life carries on undaunted. Death and rebirth are as inevitable as the deduction that the sun will rise each and every morning and set each and every night. So the Aries new moon tells us that life goes on. It ain't over till it's over, and that the evolutionary instinct in all of us to survive allows us to adapt to whatever life throws at us. And if we survive, the next step is to learn how to thrive. We can do that now when we recognize our evolutionary progress for what it is, and that it means we're born again, stronger than ever, ready to regroup now and face the future head on with the energy, courageousness, enthusiasm, and excitement of the newborn about to discover a whole new world. It's within this certainty that we can develop our faith that no matter what happens, we will survive. And surviving, even in the face of the loss of a loved one, can also lead us to understand that while they may be gone from this earthly plane, we may communicate with them on a different plane now. Evolution requires adaptation to avoid extinction. If we're still here, then it means it's meant to be, because we still have more growth and consciousness to achieve before we leave and come back to do it all again. Now, Venus's move into Taurus, April 14th, brings the desire for physical contact. And with Mars in Gemini sextile by the Aries Sun, we can make this happen once we've taken steps and the adequate precautions. So increases in the amount of hugs and kisses between grandparents and children and grandchildren, because doing so doesn't prove life-threatening anymore if we're vaccinated, can evolve us out of one stage and into another. What we do with our desire for freedom depends on our own Aries style, but it's sure to increase, just as planting that seed of independence and initiative at this Aries new moon can evolve us past the last year's unnatural state of inertia. And in that sense, life is good. And life, of course, is meant to be lived, to be embraced wholeheartedly with both arms, both hands, both, big hugs. So with Venus going into Taurus, like I said, this is almost like we can be reborn or born again and be held and be comforted and feel that physical security from touch. Now, I will be posting my Aries New Moon newsletter on Facebook and sending out my newsletter before it actually occurs on Sunday. So stay tuned for that. It'll go into a bit more detail because there are more aspects here that I will delineate that I think will be of interest to everybody. So anyway, just remember, it's Aries New Moon and life is good. It is now my pleasure to introduce this week's guest. ERIN Sullivan's 50-plus years as a personal consultant astrologer, author, teacher, and mentor means her reputation precedes her in serious astrological circles. Her 6 astrology books are classics, read worldwide in several languages and on the reading list of major international astrology schools. ERIN's background in archetypal psychology, cosmology, astrology, and the classics feed her contemporary astrological philosophy, which she shares with clients, students, and others via her Skype-based global consulting practice. The series editor for Penguin Publishing's Arcana Contemporary Astrology series for 13 years, from 1989 to 2003, ERIN helped publish some of the best minds in the astrological field. In addition, she's taught at all major astrology conferences and at special focus conferences for groups and organizations over the years. To date, her 6 books include Saturn in Transit, Boundaries of Mind, Body, and Soul, in which she outlines how Saturn's movement through our charts shows us our personal hero's journey, The Astrology of Family Dynamics, Retrograde Planets Traversing the Inner Landscape, The Astrology of Midlife and Aging, Venus and Jupiter bridging the ideal and the real, and Where in the World astrocartography, I always have trouble with that word, and relocation. The latter 2 are currently out of print and looking for a new publisher. In addition to these books, ERIN provides hundreds of articles, free podcasts, and more than 135 MP3 recordings, including her training course designed for independent learning on her website at erinsullivan.com. ERIN, it's my pleasure to welcome you back to Astrologically Speaking. How are you today?
I'm fine. It's I just love your introduction. It's sort of like Now what do I say?
Oh, no, no, no.
I know.
I
But
have a,
it's always a pleasure to chat with you and be stimulated by ideas that are brought up in our talk.
yeah, same here. I'm so thrilled that you were able to come on today.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess let's get down to it. I mean, I know, I know you've written so much, especially in your retrograde planets book, which I absolutely adore, about all of the planets' retrograde energies. But since we're in the throes of another Mercury retrograde, this time right now in Pisces, is there anything you can share with our listeners by way of advice about this particular retrograde cycle? Because we know this, and I've done shows on this, that this particular cycle is all in water for the most part,
Yes.
and or, just this specific one we're in right now in Pisces.
Well, what's interesting about Mercury retrograde is that it actually has, in the big picture, through its own cycles, it actually goes retrograde through each sign 3 or 4 to 6 times over periods of years. And I was looking back at you were mentioning the moon. The Sun Moon Neptune conjunction was the new moon most recently. And so here we are now in the process and not yet reaching even vaguely the closure of Mercury retrograde, and it's in Pisces, and it'll be the last cycle in the water cycle. But Pisces and Mercury retrograde, I really believe that what we're meant to, do and experience and work with is a process that really amplifies letting go and living in the minute. Not just the time, but the minute. And that means that Mercury retrograde now is teaching us about impermanence and trusting in the spiritual and cosmic self, uppercase S, within each of us. I mean, we may be told one thing to be on a practical level, yet it's going to shapeshift into another, because Pisces and Neptune, who's our old Greek god Poseidon, of the seas, which are always in flux, and Neptune and the sign of Pisces are associated with having to be able to be in fluidity, to be able to flow with what's going on, even though, as typical during Mercury retrograde, ideas and concepts and agreements, contracts, they'll start to shapeshift. And so I think it's important to, try not to panic if you're in the middle of something really significant, like renting a home or buying something, that it may not flow the way we want it to. And so I think it's important to recognize that the sign of Pisces, being the very last sign of the zodiac, and its station retrograde was in the last degree of the last sign. It will go direct 28th, 29th, depending on what hemisphere you're in. It will go direct, and that point at the end of the month, begin to move, which are, how you've been able to expect them. I just got a message from you. I don't know what that was.
Oh, sorry. That wasn't for you. Sorry. I didn't realize it came to you.
Oh, God.
That's okay. Don't worry about it.
Okay, well, I just changed my screen, so I'm
Oh, I'm sorry, Erin.
Okay, right. So this Mercury retrograde, it's so strange because it's become one of the more well-known things in astrology, where you go to the bank manager says, "Is Mercury retrograde?" All our, computers have shut down and we're having problems, translating money into other culture money and so on. So, but I think for each of us, this cycle is going to act out in ways very differently, but similarly. And it's going to be dependent upon the house of your horoscope that it's transiting. And if you look back sort of every 4 or 5 months, you'll notice that there have been Mercury retrogrades in Pisces before. And you might, I often think, well, let me look at my history to see what I did with it before, or did with whatever, major transit is. So it's not just about the astrology, it's also what's going on in your life and how to flow with it. How to deal with the anxiety that's very often free floating during, a major Piscean experience. Somebody who's experiencing Neptune transiting in their chart often does talk to me about the level of uncertainty of what's not known. Everything is shape-shifting. It's all changing. But that's what Poseidon was about. He won the oceans, whereas Hades won the underworld and Zeus ruled the skies. And so with the impermanence of waves of things taking place, it really does require us to rely on our deepest sense of our own worth and value.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting. That leads me to my next question, because I wanted to ask you, in general, at least, now that Uranus has gone back into Taurus for roughly the next 7 years, and we know that I've said this many times on the show, obviously Uranus has to do with change, but Taurus is about value. How is it that you expect this transit might affect us on the collective level?
The last time Uranus entered Taurus for 7 years was in 1934. Mm-hmm. And it's an 84-year cycle, and it's very regular. It is a very reliable transit of returns and cycles. It has a perfect orbit. And so what I would expect globally, massive changes in the concept of what is wealth, comfort, values. And individually, it'll have to do with our own personal value and self-worth. But because this also coincides with what we're going to be talking about next, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, it also began in the 1930s. There were times where we had Saturn and Pluto conjunct, and we'll talk about that. Mm-hmm. Collectively, with Uranus and Taurus, it will have a lot to do with global and economic chaos, and it's not unlike the 30s in many ways. With what we're looking at is leaders trying to struggle to maintain control while giving up control, and it's very kind of weird in that it shapeshifts because the Piscean element is involved in all of this. That the Saturn and Pluto, when we talk about that, they're related to this Uranus and Taurus. And when you think back to the 30s, we might be looking at something, of course, very different in its manifestation, but it will be in its essence and archetype the same. That we're looking at, disruptions of, global finances, changes in currency, that whole issue around the invisible money, the Bitcoin and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. That was a really, that's really part of what this Uranus in Taurus is going to bring, is a lot of highly unreliable stability, unreliable stability, if you will. Yeah, in other words, unstable times financially in the global arena.
We know in the 30s, and certainly I'm not a scholar of this, but I remember learning in school how the, I guess it's the Deutschmark in Germany, was so devalued. You could put, you needed a wheelbarrow full of, paper money to buy a loaf of bread.
Well, and that's what brought in the, brought the leader, Hitler, into favor, was that he worked towards bringing stability into the country and thereby, in a sense, fooling everyone. So we have to be careful of what leaders are saying in order to help us and save us in economic distress. Because if they say, well, with me, it's going to be more stable, we might be, because of this shape-shifting backdrop of Neptune in Pisces, saying, well, gee, maybe we should be more circumspect about trusting world leaders at this point with their promises, and try and realize that, you know, we have other tribes besides the political tribe, that we need to concentrate more closely on our friends and our family and our personal relationships for safety, containment, security, and balance. And also, we're going to have to learn how to manage money better.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that was my next question. You know, how you and I know as astrologers that when, you know, people see Uranus coming to aspect one of their natal planets or angles, or to trigger a, you know, a configuration in our chart, that, you know, it strikes fear in your heart, right? It's like expect the unexpected, and so anything you expect isn't going to happen. So
well, that's what it's actually very true. I mean, you know, I really am hoping that, you know, with time, because I know that in my work, people are always reassured by the astrology. There's an implicate order in the planets and their array and how it works, and now at all times we should not fear, but ask ourselves what we need to change. Because, you know, I always look at Uranus as a kind of alarm clock, where it will not stop going off until you turn it off and start working with it. Get up and start doing things. It's essentially like Neptune wants you to go to sleep. And,
don't I know it?
Uranus ticks off and awakens you. And so the awakening is always individual. The collective, though, is awakening to something that they have, especially, you know, the younger generation, not young, well, let's say the people in their 40s, they have not seen what you know, this 1930s. And the people who lived during the 1930s, some of them are still around. So they recognize that it is also possibly the rise of fascism, leaders who are really trying to control everything by themselves, and are trying to draw personal attention to their politics, and in fact really have no substantial base of operations. And this is particularly noticeable. We're fairly fortunate in North America, but it's particularly noticeable in leaderships of the high-level Western world. And if we think in terms of like empires, it's a time of empire collapsing, and we can go right back to let's say, I'm not going to go back to Mesopotamia, but Egypt. Then it fell, and then Greece, and it fell, and then the European fell, and then the British Empire. And I always thought, laughingly say, Washington, D.C. is the next stop.
Yeah.
So it's a collapse of empires, a bit of chaos, definitely chaos. But I think people need to really look to their groups and tribes, because Uranus does rule Aquarius in the 11th house of the zodiac signs, and it does have to do with tribalism, friendships that are unique to your own needs and your own uniqueness, so that we can collect together.
So you're basically saying maybe it, know who has your back kind of thing, in terms of where you find your home versus aligning with more nationalistic or patriotic or despotic energies, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and also the Uranus in Taurus is going to be in a very supportive aspect to Neptune, which we just discussed as being, part of a religious kind of change. There's, all of the religions are going at it hammer and tong. The age of Pisces that we are in. And it's I look back 40 years and I remember saying to a friend, a colleague, she says, when do you think the Third World War is going to start? And I said, we're already in it. And this is in the mid 80s. And then when I, because what it is that the spiritual foundation of the Piscean age is three major sky gods, all of whom are going at it hammer and tong, and sort of, quote, hiring their underlings, in other words, the people, to fight with this. But this Uranus and Taurus is actually sextile Neptune throughout the cycle, and trine Saturn conjunct Pluto, which suggests that it isn't the end of the world, but it is the end of an old and unbroken system.
Yeah, and that leads me to my next question. You're going there, which is great, but because everybody's sort of predicting gloom and doom with this looming Saturn Pluto meetup in January of 2020.
It's already here.
Yeah. So tell us more.
I mean, in the United States, this is where, this business of the 30s comes to mind. And I wasn't alive then, but I know my parents were. And it was a really disastrous experience for many of them because they lost the connection with their tribal unit and also lost resources, both much financial and practical, houses, etc. And so when you see the creative aspects that I mentioned of Uranus and Taurus sextiles with Neptune saying, well, maybe we can change, our spiritual fold. And maybe we can have some control, over the status quo, Saturn and Pluto, the plutocrats. And with both those aspects, it really talks about, the revolution in the awakening. And I'm always very sorry that that people are afraid, really are afraid. They actually become frightened of what they see as an aspect. They don't know enough to be afraid. They shouldn't do that. I have to just caution you, do not be afraid. But ask yourself, what is this doing to you, for you, in order for you to change in a way which is appropriate and is already, in a sense, designed in your psyche, because the astrology doesn't make anything happen. Astrology describes a circumstance or a variety of circumstances under the auspice of a planet or an array of planets, only offering us an awakening of consciousness, either by force or events, situations, attitudes, but also by choice. And by making significant personal choices that really do alter our life and one's life and worldview. But it has to come out of choice. And in the beginning of the world, in the Greek myth, the beginning was chaos.
Right.
Now, chaos doesn't mean a messy desk or a disorganized government. It means a full void, that it's something full. Jung called it a pleroma, where there's a part of the psyche that has a full void, where it's an entity, a holding pattern of all possible elements needed for creation. And they have to cohere and form in order for them to become order, because it's chaos and to order. And so when we think of chaos, it really means beginning. And indeed, it's like an alarm clock. It says, wake up. And, we're not happy about what's happening right now. But it is part of our unfolding. And I think all transiting planets, having begun at our birth, because this is where people are personally integrated into the collective, is that the general planetary array, like you were describing really well in your introduction, the transiting planets, we have to remember, for us individually, started when we were born. Like I was born with Saturn, Mars, and Pluto conjunct in Leo. Now, that's, when you get Saturn-Pluto conjunctions, October the 5th of 1914, it conjoined at 2 Cancer. Know that date, 1914?
World War I, no?
Yeah. August 11th, 1947.
Assassination?
Yeah. And then August 11th, 47 was the next Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which was the baby boom generation, the 60s.
Wow.
The revolutionary and the Vietnam and the whole war. And then November 8th, 1982 was the other most recent Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And that began a time actually that was really quite prosperous.
Right, right.
It was as if the individual was able to somehow, acquire some of the great vast wealths of Pluto, who holds in his domain, the entire wealth of Gaia, of the earth, and therefore our entire wealth. So Pluto is deep. Saturn is also really has to do with a very important homeostatic principle, so that everything doesn't fall apart at once, even though there's a poem that I love, and I've forgotten the fellow's name, but it's, where things fall apart. Yeah. And that's basically what we're doing, is we're allowing something to fall apart in order so that we can rearrange it.
That's a good way to look at it. I like that.
It's going inside of me. Like I'm in the middle of waiting to hear about a house that I want to, and they're in the middle of organizing a house buying, and it's all uncertain. So I'm actually trying to practice my own words right now.
That could be the hardest thing for us astrologers, no?
Oh, it really is, because we sit there knowing that this is happening and knowing what we have to do, and trying to encourage people to think, big, that the implicate order in the planets, we need to trust that there is something there, not to fear, but is an inquiry into what we need in order to grow and become increasingly more of who we are, to individuate, as Jung said, to grow.
I always say, and I think probably a large part of where I got this from is from reading your works, is that the universe is benign and has no vested interest in making any of us suffer, but it provides us with opportunities to grow in consciousness every moment of every day. It's just up to us to choose to recognize those moments and then to move forward, by acting on them or making changes because of them. So, I totally agree with you. But let me ask you too, how do you feel? I mean, this is a more temporary energy because it's only really the better part of 2019, but Jupiter in Sag squaring Neptune in Pisces. How do you think that plays with the current heavy-duty Saturn energy in the sky now and into next year? Is that going to be a counterbalance, or is it going to be a hindrance?
You did ask that. It was one of the things I wasn't going to talk about. But now that you mention it, of course, you've got me going. And the thing about a transit in as it happens right now, like Saturn coming up to conjoin Pluto and Uranus entering Taurus. That's that. It doesn't just last for a few minutes. It begins an entire eternity of formation. So it isn't just this year, but this year is when we begin to experience this coming year. When we begin to experience what will be coming for the rest of the world and the rest of eternity, because that's what planets do. But the Jupiter-Neptune one is real interesting because to my mind, because Zeus, the ancient god of the Greeks and the head of the Olympiads, he was a ruthless god, but he also ruled something called hubris. I mean, he ruled pretty much everything, so that if someone was behaving out of order or outside their own personal domain who has extended themselves into a position of hierarchy that they don't belong in, as we've seen very clearly in the last 2 years. As soon as you get hubris involved, Zeus steps in, Jupiter, and he punishes the hubristic individual or tribe with what's called ate in Greek, which means taking your wits away. And I love that one because it could be any CEO, any president, any dictator, any prime minister. Look what's going on in the UK and with Europe with the Brexit. It's madness. I'm at the stage now, speaking to a really good friend of mine, collaborator in France, where I do the workshop, uh, and he's British, and he says this UK Brexit thing has just gone mad. And I said, yeah. I said, I don't even know what it means. I can't understand it.
I know.
This Neptune is you know, it brings oblivion and to the mind and confusion, so that you're reading something that's sequentially written and it's got meaning to it, but you can't understand what it's about.
Yeah.
And so that's part of what I think that Jupiter Neptune square is. I mean, generally it's quite benign, but but what it means psychologically is that if you don't understand it, I mean, you really don't understand what's going on, then forget about it.
Right.
Just don't even go there. Just say, okay, I don't understand this, so I'm going to go back to, you know, Saturn, which I do understand its constraints and its opportunities and its, you know, leadership quality, and also, you know, the necessity for, you know, much more stronger boundaries, and forget about Neptune and Jupiter, because, you know, they're just going to bring in more and increasing the numbers of irrational people.
Right.
Lead us to where, you know? I mean, if it was, you know, Moses bringing the 10 Commandments, I can appreciate that.
Right.
Because it's solid. There's 10 Commandments. It's on rock. The God is on the mountain. It's all happening. And, you know, but I can't understand what these leaders are telling us. I really don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I hear you.
You understand that?
Yeah, no, it's funny. So it's, you know, it goes back to the kind of all that glitters isn't gold. So, you know, use your own powers of discernment to, you know.
Hers new clothes.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
All those fairy tales.
I said that 2 years ago. It's like, where is everybody? Where's that kid in the street who's supposed to yell out, look, he's naked?
I know. Well,
another story.
There are some kids. I have a great, by the way, with this going on, because I mentioned back in 1947, Saturn Pluto, that began the youth revolution that circled the world. It was everywhere from New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, China, all over the world. So we're looking at a new youth revolution. I'm seeing it. My grandchildren are 18, 19, and 22. And I can tell you that that generation, you know, the good ones, and are really up in arms about what's going on. They are. They're acting out. They're hitting the streets with.
I know. I have he'll be 24 in April, my son, and I know. I've been, you know, kept abreast.
And
yeah.
Mrs. King's great granddaughter gave a talk that was, I couldn't believe it. She was like 14. And she gives this talk, and it's Martin Luther King's great granddaughter. And you know, she says, you know, she's basically revamping her great grandfather's ideals and bringing them to people her age.
Wow, that's very cool. I was thinking too, I just saw her on the news, the gal, one of the gals, but the whole group of young people after the Parkland, Florida shooting who become, you know, so politically active, and it's part of their psyches now. It's not anything they're going to stop anytime soon.
Well, there's always been, you know, placard holders and gatherings in the streets, and I can't say that my group, the 60s, were the first ones, because it's not true. But it's the most recent one that we've ever had, where masses, thousands of people hit the streets and said, no, this is not what we want. This has to change, you know. For overtaking the general office of Berkeley University.
Yep.
When you think of what could happen that is nonviolent, because these kids don't want to shoot anybody. They just want to tell you what to do.
Right. I remember reading an excellent book called Behind These Ivy Walls by Paul Rudd about the takeover at Columbia in '68. And that was fascinating too. He went on to become one of the weathermen, but you know, that was another story. But Erin, I don't want to interrupt. I do want to interrupt you because I love talking to you. We have about We have about a little less than 10 minutes. I want to take a break and pick the winner of your personal heroic journey report. And then I want to ask you about your upcoming workshop, because I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to do that. So without further ado, I'm putting my hand in this very, very well populated bowl of names on pieces of paper of people who have submitted, wanted to be part of this drawing. And the name that I am drawing is Sean Margaret Cohen. So congratulations, Sean Margaret Cohen, and I will contact you after the show is over and send your information to Erin so that she can get your birth data, etc. So tell us, Erin, what you're up to now, because I know that you're about to teach on April 6th and 7th an online workshop at Kepler College that's called The Astrology of Gods and Mortals. And I love that you were talking about all the gods now. Can you tell us more about that? And then, give people information about how they can find it online, register for it, etc.
Well, what it is, it was the first class of my archetypal psychological astrology in contemporary practice course. And it was the first class, and it was meant to be 2.5 hours. It turns out to be about 4. So what we've done is we have split that lecture from the origins of every planet that we use in our horoscope, the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, onward out to Pluto. And I have thought, I am an artist. I have to tell you this. I'm an artist. I'm a potter. I do micaceous pottery. And my PowerPoint has become an art form for me. And I sound like I'm bragging, and I am, because these images that I present in this PowerPoint talk presentation are absolutely beautiful, that you're immediately engaged through visual art, as well as my knowledge of the origins of Western civilization and the gods that populate our horoscope. So it enlightens people on what is active in their psyche, because even though they know nothing about Greek mythology, they lie as archetypes in the level of our depth unconscious and our collective unconscious, and they really help you understand what is going on in your personal life and in the world around you. And so that I really am excited about. It's April 6th and 7th at 9 p.m. Pacific time, and it's Kepler College. And you can just Google Kepler College and see what is being presented there. And I'm very excited about this because it's an opportunity to teach some, people who have never looked at it this way before. And, I've evolved my astrology over 50 years to contain a number of cosmic principles and psychological principles that say, well, look, this is what that part is. That's why you can feel this way, but how about thinking about it another way? Mm-hmm. So it really did evolve out of a course I did at the University of Royal Roads in Victoria, British Columbia. And so it's it's really intense. It's good value, $79 for, the 2-day Saturday, Sunday workshop.
Yeah, it sounds amazing, Erin. I mean, I love that I love the Jungian stuff and the archetypal stuff. I was a literature major, and when you were talking before about hubris, it's like, I actually learned in high school, I think, studying some Greek tragedy about the tragic flaw, and that hubris is a tragic flaw, which always takes the hero, or heroine down.
Exactly.
So it's interesting.
It's like the tragic flaw we have an Achilles heel, right? And I just had an Achilles rupture 2 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
And the Achilles heel was the place where his mother dips him into the fires of immortality, but she's holding him by his heel. So he's immortal everywhere except in the heel, which is where he was shot on the grounds of the Trojan War.
Right.
That killed him. So our tragic flaw is hubris. Yeah, it's like I think
Well,
I'm
it's arrogant to think that I think the point is, the it was arrogant of the mother in a sense to think that she could totally protect him and make him totally invincible, right? Which is an energy that he carried.
We'd love to do it for all our children, but we can't.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the heartbreak of parenthood, is that we cannot save our children. We have to teach them well.
Right, exactly, and let them go. Yeah.
And this Saturn return, or Saturn, the heroic journey, is pretty phenomenal. I mean, I wrote this in a what I would call a fugue state, and and Rebecca Martin is the genius programmer who has illustrated beautifully. And what it does is it points out, like like Joseph Campbell was a big influence of mine, and I learned a few classes from him. And he wrote a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, which has become famous through the interviews. And in that book, he talks about the heroic round. And so I suddenly saw it in the horoscope, but I couldn't figure out where it started. So I made myself quite crazy saying, does it start at the midheaven or does it start at the ascendant? What is the call to adventure? Mm-hmm. The call to adventure occurs at the midheaven when you are vocare, called to your vocation. And then it goes through each house, developing that, crossing the ascendant, developing of the individual personality, fourth house, retrieving the treasure, fifth, seventh house, the descendant, goes up, bringing the boon to mankind. And so every person has this cycle, and that's what's so great about this heroic journey that Our Lady has won. And
I love this. I mean, when I first saw that in the book, I was like, oh my God, because you married for me the things that I was interested in, that I had studied. And, you just automatically brought together literature and all of this effort to, create catharsis in the world, and, one's own hero's journey and how they mesh together, how we can be personally satisfied and successful and also part of the collective.
Yeah.
But tell people, because we're running short on time, because I want to say, I had no idea, even though you talked about it last year, that this is an 88-page report with, as ERIN said, original artwork and all of her, her writing. So, and it's only for $35. How can people get one if they want to order one? Because sadly, they were not the lucky winner.
Well, the best way now, because my store is in limbo, is to email me, erin@erinsullivan.com, and then I can order it for them, and it can be paid through PayPal. Mm-hmm. And I can order it for them, and then Rebecca will then assemble and put it together, because it requires 3 programs to go into a single format.
Wow. Well, I'm going to tell everybody, because I'm going to order one, man. I'm like, why haven't I ordered one? I have no idea. Oh. So we are out of time. I want to thank you, ERIN, so much. I do hope you'll come back. I was, I want to announce any other programs that you're doing and anything else that you're involved in, but it's a pleasure to talk to you. So I'm sure we're going to have a lot of people listening to this show, and I thank you for making the time.
Oh, thanks, Sherry. You are indomitable and so reliable, and I love your introductions. They're always so very well said.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Well, thanks to ERIN, and thanks everyone else for joining me today. I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Be sure to join me next week, March 21st, for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking, when my guest will be professional astrologer and president of the NCGR Annapolis chapter, Lynn Coiner. Till then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book.